Hey, everybody. Carl, and I'm back here to share a little bit more about my love of comics in our comic book club. I want to talk about a comic that started me off, this group that really took me to a whole different place. It was the Fantastic Four. When I found out about these characters, it was I was a kid who was going through a lot of hard times at that point, and I hadn't even seen these comics, but somebody told me the story at the age of 8 of who these characters were, and I wanted to know as much as I could about them. And they kind of have always been a part of my life because at that time everything had been a little bit on the dark side. My mom had been really sick; she'd been in the hospital. My father was left to care for me and my brothers and my sister, and we had actually spent some time. Um, I can't even put it into words, into sort of like a group home or into a foster setting, even though we weren't foster children. They were just sort of watching because it was just too much for my father to handle by himself. So my younger brother Chris, we were there, and I remember we were sitting there, and it was sort of like summer camp for us in a way. We really didn't feel like we were in a weird. We knew it wasn't a great place to be, but we also felt like it was a summer camp type of situation, and it was a way to give my father a bit of a break because he was going through a lot with my mom. But at that time, I remember sitting down at a table and these guys who were the counselors at the time started talking about, oh, you like Batman and Superman, you don't know about the Fantastic Four. And these guys started talking about this tale about these four people who have been affected by cosmic rays. I was 8 years old. I had never seen one of their Fantastic Four comics. And all I knew was after they told me the story, I wanted to read about these guys. And so I got sucked into this little world. So let's talk a little bit of that's what brought me to it. But I wanted to talk about what was the creation of this. This is really an amalgamation. This is the beginning of jazz between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Stan Lee was kind of between the two of them. He had this. He was the nephew of the publisher of Jack Kirby's boss. Now, Jack Kirby had already started to get himself a bit of a success. He had written Captain America. Him and Justin had shared duties, and then he had created Captain America. And they were pretty young guys. They were in their mid 20s, and Stan Lee became was started to work at Timely Comics. It wasn't Marvel Comic books at the time, and what they started to do was they proceeded um, to be very successful. Not Stan Lee. Stan Lee was just the office boy. He would basically be what an intern is. He was fetching coffees. He was filling inkwells. He was just sitting around learning the craft. And Stanley, to his credit, was pretty talented. Even though he never went to college, he had already he had been applying. Ways he would make money is he would go and he'd apply for essay contests in newspapers, and he'd win significant amounts of money doing that. So even at a young age, he was pretty prolific. Now, Jack was a self-made man. He went to art school. He dropped out. He didn't think it was for him. He had worked on the streets. His goal was to draw himself out of poverty. So he was a hardworking guy. A lot of respect for the man. And so between the two, so this is where they're coming from two different worlds. But Jack, Stan really has a lot of respect for Jack. They both go into the military. Stanley goes um, into the media section. He basically writes story, scripts, as he would say, for how not to get VD and venereal diseases. But the people he's working with that were in this core were either movie stars like Burgess Meredith, who played Mickey and Rocky, or he was working with people like Norman Mailer. This was a very exclusive group that he got himself into, even though, but Stanley always felt like he was a little bit of an outsider because, everybody else was like, what do you do for a living? I work in comics, and it really wasn't a respectable trade. Stanley is actually not his real name, nor is Jack Kirby their real names, because it was they were nom de plumes, but they were hoping that they would make it big in other mediums at that point because it was looked at as a childish pursuit, but it was paying the bills. And comics were very profitable endeavors to be in. So the 1940s happens. Jack Kirby, by the way, he's really risking his life. He becomes a scout during World War II because he goes in and he doesn't get to go into one of these cushy places. He goes into one of the battalions that really sees a lot of action. And what happens is that his CO finds out he can draw, so they need that skill. They send him out as a scout. That meant he would go out and into a town that they were going to attack and create maps. If they found him, they were going to shoot him on sight. very risky, very high. Um, what was I going to say? Death rate that would come through that. Now, Jack, at the end of the day, he gets kind of lucky. He does get injured, but because of his injury, he gets sent to a hospital. Unfortunately, his whole battalion gets wiped out, I believe, during the Battle of the Bulge. And Jack, I think, is very affected by this. We start to see this in his later work as he gets older. You'll start to see some of the things that reflected in the war, and the war is something both of these men take for the rest of their lives. It's a very unique part of American history because everybody was contributing to this. Now, at this point, comic books are in their heyday. Jack Kirby's Captain America is so popular; it's paying again the bills. He writes 3 years worth of comics before being enlisted, so that they would still be in publication while he was serving. Really a workhorse. And as we go on to talk longer, you'll find out how much of this guy had an incredible workout. I think he was working, it wasn't unusual for him to be doing 16, 18-hour days. Um, Stan Lee is kind of, not very happy with what he's doing. They come back from World War II. Things start to change. Soldiers who had been reading these comics on the front line for entertainment, they put them away. They're looked at as childish pursuits. Anything that's really serious, there are a couple of publications that try to create crime comics and monster and horror comics and, scintillation. And they proceed to, there's a guy who goes out and says, hey, this is ruining America's youth. We got pictures to the words. And basically Congress is like, we're getting ready to censor you. And so the comic book authority says, no, we'll censor ourselves, sort of like what the movie industry did. And they created a comic book authority. And so what happens is comic books really lose their bite and their interest as an adult entertainment at that point. They're very, if you look at some of those issues that come between there of Batman and Superman, it's almost like a coloring book. It has no bite to it. The stories are one-offs. They don't sit together. There's no real logic. They just look at the pretty pictures. It's something to entertain your 4 or 5-year-old. But there's no real story to it. EC Comics ends up going out of business. That's there. Jack Kirby, at this time, to his credit, Joe Sinek, they're looking for stuff. He ends up writing romance comics. And you think, I always thought, geez, who would be reading that stuff? They sold like gangbusters during that time. They were very popular. They were, so, Jack knew how to put together a product, knew how to put together a comic book that could sell. He goes in afterwards and he proceeds to think he's going to start his own publishing house for syndicated comic strips like, Peanuts. He does an adventure series in the theme of Prince Valiant, who's definitely somebody who Jack took a lot of influence through. So what happens is that the publishing goes south after a couple of years, very successful in the beginning, does not last. Jack needs work. He goes back to Marvel, and he's not had the greatest relationship. It wasn't like, one point there was a question of whether, Marvel stole the Captain America from him and Joe Sinek. They actually created their own other comic called American Flag. They were kind of really annoyed with Marvel. But Jack needed a job, so he went back. Stan was like getting a little tired of the whole business at this point. He was really, he didn't feel like anybody was appreciating his work. At the time, Stan's uncle, who gave Stanley his job, he proceeds to have lunch, or not lunch, I believe it's golf, is what I heard. They had lunch at the golf course. Well, you know what? I wasn't there. But he basically has a meeting. He has a social meeting with the head of DC Comics. And DC's like, everything's going really good. In 1956, we launched Showcase, and we revitalized and revamped all of our B-level superheroes. Like the Flash got a new costume, Green Lantern. We added new people like Martian Manhunter and Aquaman into the fray. And it's been doing really well. As a matter of fact, we threw them all together in one comic book. And Justice League of America is selling really well. So in your face there, Timely Comics. So Stan's uncle comes back to Jack and says, "Hey, I want to make one of these books like Justice League of America. They have something we don't. We should have that." So to give you an idea of the image of Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics cannot sell their comics directly to the end users. So, meaning that they actually have to use the same delivery system that's run by the DC Comics. They're kind of hampered here. So, what they're doing mostly is monster comics and reprint. And so, what they do is there's a couple of little things that are going on that come to create this issue we're talking about. here. So Stanley is kind, like I said, he's kind of tired. He wants to get out of the system, and his wife, he constantly quoted his wife Barbara as saying, "Why don't you, at least if this is your last one, do the one you want to do anyway?" And so he goes, "What do you got to lose?" So he grabs Jack Kirby, again, a guy who's had a lot of respect for as an artist, and the two of them put together, it's kind of jazz, as I would call it. Stanley puts together a plot line, what he wants the book to be. Jack takes a lot of ideas he's been working together on and puts together this great culmination of the Fantastic Four that the world had never really seen before. Now, one of the reasons I'm using this book, this is a Titian book. Titian is a group that creates very high-end artist books. These are not published by Marvel or DC. They're limited runs. There are, they'll do a section on Monet. They're more of like the highbrow coffee table book. And so I don't think either Jack or Stan would have ever thought that the work they were working on that moment would be published years after their death into a high-end book. Jack would later on go on to say that he felt that comic books should be in museums, and the work that had been done there, and it was already starting to be expressed through people licked and taking sections of comic pages and made them into great artwork. So that said, let's just go bring it into like this book, which is a Titian. And you can see that this is kind of a special book in itself. They'll take basically a little frame, and they're going to, in the beginning, just to show you the quality of this work and the genius that's going on here, and some of the drama, really to pull it out there that these guys were putting on in these small books that were really considered pulp fiction, this throwaway information. And so let's go into the first page of the Fantastic Four. I'm going to go back on. Now, one of the nice things that Titian does here in this particular work that they released, and they released a few of them, was they make it feel like it's a comic book you grab for the first time. Glossy front page or paper. As I've talked before, they use a yellowed paper. And again, the artists knew that this was going to be what the final result was going to be, that they weren't going to be on this crisp white paper, that they was going to be yellowed. So they made sure the inks matched correctly. Now, I want to talk quickly about the design of this cover. There's tons of people out there who've done essays and dissertations and so forth. I have a real job, so I'm not going to go to, I wasn't going to go get my PhD in comics. Had to put food on the table. But let's respect what's going on here for a second. We've got the four elements here. We've got earth. We've got wind, and the Invisible Woman. We've got fire with the Human Torch, and we got water with Mr. Fantastic. And we've got the monster right here in the center here, and they're not winning. This is the challenge that they're going on. It's destroying. People are running around. You're looking at this book for the first time. They're not in costumes. They're not superheroes, you know. And one of the reasons that they're doing is they're wanting to fly underneath the radar. They don't want to get in trouble with DC Comics and have them not deliver the darn comic book for them in the beginning. So they're not printing out superhero comics. This is a very unsuperhero cover. And it shows in the first section of the book what they're trying to accomplish here. They're not really sure what they are doing. They're trying to put together a team. They know if they print something that's exactly like the JLA, they're not going to get this. They're not going to get their book market. They're not going to make any money. So part of that is again the restrictions that are going on that create great art. So with that said, we go into the first page here of the Fantastic Four, and just have to spend a second here. There's not a single comic book that I read up until the 2000s that didn't have this muscular guy here. Usually somebody who basically was getting sand kicked in their face, but was able to hit some rubber bands, was able to transform their bodies. One of these days, I'm going to fill out one of these ads, and you just wait. But what they start with is they don't name heroes. They give them their real names. They're not really running any identities here. And all we get here is the beginnings of some of Jack Kirby's. He's still trying to figure out what's going on. These guys don't know exactly what they're doing. They're sneaking in here. And it's almost like in a way, not only is it that They have nothing to lose, but they're kind of almost doing it in the way of a speakeasy. That they have to fly a little under the radar when they make this book. So all of a sudden we've got if you read the first page, you go the Fantastic Four, and we got this guy at the bottom. He could be the bad guy. He's clouded. He's shrouded here. He's got a gun. It's pointed. Chekhov. It's been fired. The are scared. We don't know what's going on here. And then we go to our next page. And the Invisible Girl, who's not a lady yet, I'm sorry, but this is 1963. But she's the Invisible Girl. She's not even Invisible Girl. She's Susan Storm. She goes to a socialite's house, and the flare goes on. She doesn't just say, "Excuse me, I got to powder my nose." There could have been a million ways for her to get out of this book, out of this scene, but she needs to turn invisible. Not only that, she decides to hop into a cab without telling anybody, gives the guy, and then she's still invisible, gives him money, knowing that this guy's going to run away so she could keep the cab fare. The woman stole a ride. She caused all of this. She ran into this guy with his packages. Not very heroic. Next, we have the Thing. So the Thing's sitting here. The other guy's trying to help him out, buy some clothing, and a flare goes off. The Thing decides to strip off, and we've got him right now in his brown boxers. This is going to change over time, and as soon as he takes off his jacket, he becomes bigger. You know, he came in through the front door, and I'm sure he didn't, I'm sure he could have fit through the front door, but when he takes off his jacket, he's taller now, and he busts through the door. Not only that, he rips up the street, goes under the sewer pipes, pops up to get into, busts up a car, and at this point, the police are mobilized. They're like, "What's going on here?" So he could have just simply sashayed back with his jacket on, and no one would have been the wiser. Now, on top of that, we go back to Johnny, and Johnny is with his friend, and they're working out. They're working here. Johnny, I like to point out, he's like a James Dean, young Brando archetype, and he's sitting there. He's working away with his friend. They must have been working forever on this hot rod, and all of a sudden that four goes off, and now the four is like this number four. It's no longer the Fantastic Four, and burns his car that him and his buddy were working on. Basically, I'd be kind of annoyed if I was his friend. I mean, damn it, we've been working on this thing for a couple of weeks, put in all of our lunch money to afford this hot rod, and you've melted it right down to the ground. He flies in the air. Nobody knows what these guys are about. They're scrambling jets. These guys could be the villains at this point in the story. The jets come after him. He melts them. They start shooting missiles at him. And it looks like it's the end for him. But then again, this elastic guy comes up. So right now, we don't know who these people are. They're not showing themselves to be heroic. They're kind of on the outs with the law. And then we get them all sitting together, and Mr. Fantastic, he's smoking his pipe. It's still known to us right now as the reader is Reed Richards. We don't know who these characters are yet, except for the front cover. We know that they're names, but they haven't been identified with the individuals. Next, we come back and we look here and we see, we do cutback. So here we are in the present, and they've decided to go back. Hey, you should have seen what happened a couple months ago. So really kind of sharp here. This I feel is Stan Lee and his knowledge of some pacing, of going back and looking in the past. And what I find interesting here is he doesn't talk, but we get Ben Grimm. He's basically, you got to be kidding me. We got to steal a rocket and basically commit treason. We got to steal the number one art thing there. And Reed saying, yeah, we got to do it because the U.S. government's too stupid to take care of it. We have to do it. And if we had to look at these faces that are coming in here, I'd go Jimmy Stewart. I would go John Wayne, Kim Novak, and Tab Hunter in that order, or maybe a James Dean type of guy. Sue only has to hit Ben's ego. She knows how to cut right to right there, because he's like, no how, no way. He gets so ticked off. He's like, all right, I'm willing to commit treason because this pretty lady just told me I was a coward. They go in, they stack into the government base that they've been working on, and they get in the rocket. Did anybody get hurt when they did that? You never really know about that, but I kind of find that probably, there might have been a couple of people who really seriously hurt, if not killed. Let's talk about some of the genius here that's coming in here, because when we start to look at some of the artwork that's here, some of it feels like this here in this panel here with the arms and the rocket and the flames, it's all off. We come down here to this corner. It is a tight shot. This is something that Jack Kirby had already been drawing. Um, and we'd seen stuff like this already in EC Comics. It was very tight. They were doing the lift off the rockets. Nothing to look at. It's really blah. But when we look inside the ship, we really start to see some good character development. Good drawing. What I will say, what I love, is how Jack has decided to create cosmic rays. And I mean, George Lucas must have read this comic book when he decided to create Star Wars, because this is really the Star Wars pulses that we could see. We could see the spacing, and I guarantee you this had a lot to do with some of the sci-fi we see later on. And this really could reads out like a sci-fi comic, as sci-fi movie scene. They crash again. Not a big fan of the rocket. They gather themselves. They've obviously survived. Sue slowly, we get this slow thing of what's happening. She slowly becomes invisible. We've already seen their powers, but now they're discovering them for the first time. Apparently, Johnny's like a little freaked out. Reed's there. She comes back. No harm, no foul. She just can turn herself translucent. But Ben's kind of pissed off about this. He's been the hothead, even though he's not going to be the Human Torch. And he pays the ultimate price. He gets the powers that cannot change back. He gets trapped inside of this rock body. And in a way, it's Reed's that causes this pain. He gets a power that's kind of nifty, but he can turn back. He can change back. We go back to the Human Torch, and again, incredible destructive power. I mean, I think he sets the fall. Again, he can turn back into something. Now, we're starting to get a hint that these people are going to work for a greater good. As far as look, we've got these powers. We need to do something with them. And in this one little panel here, which in the grand design that I reviewed a couple days ago, this is the image of them here. And the first line is great. I ain't bad anymore. I am what Susan called me, the Thing. Of course, they wrote this one other page right here to really show that Reed Richards is a bit of a dick. Goes, and I'll call myself Mr. Fantastic. Kind of shows you that these guys aren't always likable. Even when you're smart, smart, Mr. Smarty Pants. So we go back, we've got these four characters there, and we all of a sudden go into, here we've got the table. Let's go ahead and put our toys into action. We see our challenge here. We've got a monster coming out of the ground. That's a little bit of a problem. And, Reed has gotten some special pages that show that that this hole came up and swallowed a town up. I even like the black and white thing here. It really reminds me of some nice early 19 sci-fi. Then we go into, Reed really using his brains. We really don't see him stretch as much. They kind of keep him a little bit restrained in his powers. And Susan, they really don't know yet what to do with these people. As far as their power sets are concerned, they know that Johnny, they can flame, and Ben's a strong man. And we're going to see that in this series, in this episode here. So here we've got the problem. City gets sucked up. Big green monster comes up, and we find out at the bottom the Mole Man is responsible. Who's the Mole Man? Good bit of mystery. Mr. Fantastic, again, using his machines, not stretchy powers, figures out where the bad guys are. They grab a jet. They've already started to logo the jet, and we're in the beginnings of them. And I bet this is something that Stan and Jack are trying to figure out, is who are these guys going to be in a few issues when the mystery's there. But they've already put a jet, and they've already put a little number 4 there. And so as soon as they get to the island, they're incognito. They're not wearing costumes. We're not identifying them. They don't even know what, and again, this is who they are. So immediately, there's a 3-headed monster that's come out, and that's what they're attacking. And then all of a sudden, all right, well, I will turn my body into a lasso. I will save my sister's brother. They're not married yet, from fall to his death, even though he could fly out with flames. And they get trapped. And when they do, they get knocked out with light. And here's some of the things, like I was talking about before with the spaceman. You look at this. This is really, Jack starts to do more of this in his work, and far, far less of this. So Jack had certainly had by this point. He was the artist. He just wasn't playing all the beats that we wanted him to play, but he certainly had them in his repertoire. And when we see them, they're knocked out by a light. They're put into these big, swaddle clothings, pieces of cloth with mittens on them. I just call them the mitten outfits. They go down and they find out that they're basically the special garb to protect their eyes because they could get basically blindness, like you could get snow blindness. And we're introduced to this mystery guy here, the Mole Man, and and then we're like, okay, well, who's the Mole Man? We're not going to tell you yet. We're going to go secret, the Mole Man's secret, and meanwhile, we go back to Susan, and we go back to this rock monster here. And Jack again is also getting a little bit of a trouble. Is working his way through, noodling around how to draw the thing. He's an overweight piece of rock, um, glasses. Just trying to, they're really trying to figure out what this guy is going to be about. He's got the brown outfit, um, and it's rock. It's really Rock Monster versus another Rock Monster, except that Ben's a little bit stronger. They run. They realize they got to go back to help. I think Ben still decided to put back on his overcoat and his hat again after fighting the Rock Monster. Um, and then we get back right down to the Mole Man's lair. And one of the things I really want to point out here, even though this is issue one, we are getting a theme. There are some themes that are starting to come in here. They're being introduced. And I don't know whether it's Jack or Stan. I tend to believe that it's Stan that's there. The Mole Man has a throne. He's not he's not the Joker. He's not like a little thug that's there. He controls the monsters behind the screen. He is this in Spider-Man. They had the Kingpin who was more powerful, I feel, when he wasn't fighting Spider-Man, but when he was pulling the all of the all the ropes and forth to make all the other guys, all the strings to make all the other bad guys work. And so here the Mole Man is really has the ability to control all these things. So he's really wielding great power here. And so this is going to be the type of guys that the Fantastic Four are going to start with. This is like just the prelude to, even Doctor Doom being the king of Latveria, and Kang the Conqueror that we're going to eventually see, and all these other people. Basically, the Fantastic Four are dealing with royalty. They're dealing with nation states. And even though their government doesn't recognize them now, they're already stepping in to deal with the threats that are going to really affect the rest of the world. So kind of interesting how they're working this in and how they're making that jump. So we get a basic, simple origin of the Mole Man. He's a guy. Nobody likes him. His wife abandons him. He can't get a date. He decides to go to the Antarctic. He loses his way, can't see very well, falls into a tunnel. From there, he creates a kingdom. But what's really not, and then what's here now, he could never had to leave his throne. But we already see that when the Mole Man and Mr. Fantastic, because he is in his, what I would call his mitten suit, he cannot really stretch, which was a cute little way, which would explain this scene. I think Jack Kirby was already pacing out, like, how was he going to have a guy who could stretch, would obviously kick the Mole Man's butt all day long. But by putting him in this mitten suit, basically he is given, he is Mr. Fantastic's power. And he's showing that if it's just a regular human against the Mole Man's got them every day. And then the Mole Man's like any other good Bond villain. He's like, no, I got a big tunnels throughout the rest of the world. I'm going to destroy the world with my monsters. Now, at that point, the Thing says, I've had enough. Now, in this little piece right here, I think we're starting to see the genesis, even in issue one, of what would have eventually become the Thing's model as a type. I can see a little bit better shading and more definition inside of the rock. We've got the blue shorts here now, which are going to eventually become their uniforms. Even up here in the mitten suits, we've got the blue. One of the things that happens is when these guys were sending out their ink, the inkers would make mistakes back and forth, the colorists, and sometimes they'd read a color code wrong. So they had it brown before, but this blue, we start to see this blue come out with this orange, and it looks just magnificent on them. And it's, and so was this Jack making an error? Was it, whatever it was, I consider it a happy accident. So he shows up. So we've come from this master plan, and one of the things, we're on page 23 here. There's only about we've got 25 pages to this book, and one of the problems that we're getting is these guys are on a tear, but they're running out of pages, and we're gonna, they just don't know how to end the song as satisfying as I'd like it to be. So Thing comes in, the Mole Man's not having any of it, pulls out the monster. You think it's going to be the Thing that comes out. Nope, it's Johnny Storm. He's turned into a flame, and he, at this time, he's currently the most powerful creature. He puts the monster at bay. Mr. Fantastic pops out of his mitten suit, grabs the mole man. The mole man pulls another string, just like he's been pulling a string here, and pulls another one, releasing all the monsters and dooming the island. It looks like they're grabbing the mole man, but we don't see him in the final chapter to see what happened to him. We assume he goes down with his island. There's a lot of questions that are going on here, and it's a very very short ending. But we still don't know where these guys are. We don't know who the good guys are. We don't know who the bad guys are. I mean, we do know that the Fantastic Four has stopped this threat, but are they with us completely? The government doesn't think that they are. They're fighting these other powers that the government doesn't even know about. So it's kind of interesting. It's very interesting. You know, Stan and Jack are going to be writing a couple more issues before they realize how popular these guys are going to be, because they didn't know. It took about 90 days for them to really get the returns back on their sales because of the way that they were sending their stuff out. So here they've got this book, and if DC was just quickly thumbing their nose through it, they go, "Oh, it's just a nice little monster book." But we know that this is going to be it's just monsters fighting monsters. We know this is going to start to transform into something amazing, and it's got a good hook. So again, a lot of interesting stuff is happening here, and what a great way to start! What a great way to start an amazing ride. It's only going to get better. All right, well, so long, guys. Take care. Bye.